Hello and welcome to the programme which looks at the Holy Land. I am Paul Calvert. Psalm 46 verse 11 from the New King James Bible says this: "The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge."
I'm with Jonathan Felstein from Genesis 123 Foundation, and we're talking about the new project he's doing to help Holocaust survivors. Now, Jonathan, what is this project that you're doing?
Hey, Paul. So first of all, thank you. It's an interesting project because it was something that I realized was lacking. And it's after more than 80 years since the Holocaust ended, I realized that there's something that we still need to do. This past week, when we observed Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Memorial Day here in Israel and around the world, every year there's a new level of statistics about how many survivors there are remaining in the world, and I researched it, and generally it's assumed that there are about 196,000 people who are considered survivors of that era living under Nazi and Soviet brutality. Not everybody necessarily was a survivor of a death camp or a concentration camp. Many were in hiding and other forms of suffering. And of the 196,000, approximately 116,000 live here in Israel, and they're dying as they're older. They're all in their 80s and 90s plus. They're dying at a rate of more than 10,000 a year. So simply mathematically, in about 10 years, there will be no more Holocaust survivors. And that's jarring and that's shocking. And it's especially so considering how many people are denying the Holocaust and denying the dimensions and the depth of the Holocaust. And I don't know if it makes a difference to that, having people who are still alive. So I realized that as these people age, because so many of them, unfortunately, I can explain why, are living below the poverty level, there's a need. And so I set out with a very modest goal for the next 10 years to raise $196,000, very modest, so that we have enough to give basic needs, basic stipends, for hot food, for medicine, so they have warm clothes and can pay for heat in the winter, as compared to continue to suffer at the final years of their lives. Because if you think about it, in the beginning of their lives, these are people who are in their earliest memories, whether they were 4, 5, 6 years old or 14, 15, 16 years old during the Holocaust. Their earliest memories are those of trauma. And we can't let them live their last years in trauma. And we can't affect what's going on in Israel and the surroundings that create some of the trauma. But what we can do and must do is alleviate some of the insecurity around money. So it's not millions and millions of dollars. And I've been asking people to commit a monthly amount for 10 years. And it's because it's really not a huge amount of money in the scheme of things. It's not $196 million. It's $196,000. It's very tenable. It's very doable. We've gotten some lovely response. And I think that while I'm never a person to always be trying to raise money, I think this is a really important social cause that Jews and Christians can and must stand together, just so that in 10 years we can look back and say we did what we could to make sure that these people live the ends of their lives at least free of fear, if not in comfort.
It's like you say as well, the time is now, isn't it? Because in 10 years' time, it's going to be gone and you can't do this. So you need to be doing it now. Yeah.
Correct.
Why are so many Holocaust survivors living in poverty today?
So a lot of it, I really only hit penny fell when I was writing this piece. In the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a massive immigration to Israel of about 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union. Now, what's ironic, this is 30 plus years ago, there were people coming who were my age, who had spent a career working in whatever Soviet jobs they were given, and they didn't necessarily have careers that were transferable here in Israel, and they also didn't have language skills. They weren't planning for many years to leave, and they weren't studying Hebrew, and they weren't looking to try and create parallel careers so that they could, in their 50s and 60s, could continue to work. The other compelling piece of that is that when they came here with no pensions because they were fleeing the Soviet Union, what was left of the Soviet Union. So you come here with no job skills or no job skills that are transferable. You come here with no pension, And then you find yourself in a situation where, yes, you've lived through all of this suffering, but you've come to Israel too late to be eligible for the major reparations that the German government took responsibility for. And all of these came to this kind of in retrospect, it's obvious. And I wish that I had thought about it 30 years ago, that someone would need to look out for the well-being of the people who came to Israel 30 years ago, who were my age and are now in their late 80s and early 90s and having no basis for financial stability. And as everyone knows, it's intuitive. The longer you live, the more medical problems you're going to have, and more medical problems you have with medications and doctor's visits, even with the quasi-socialized medicine that we have here in Israel, it just becomes more expensive. So we want them to live longer, we want them to live well, but we also want them to live without fear of taking their last 100 shekels in a month and choosing between food, medicine, or heat in the winter.
Does the state of Israel help at all with Holocaust survivors?
The state does. It's not sufficient. And I, as an Israeli, I feel like that's something that perpetually has fallen through the cracks, and we can make all kinds of excuses for it, in the sense that, especially now in the midst of a war, the defense budget is always going to be our biggest budget. But 196,000 people, who are not, by the way, all living in Israel, represents a very small percent of Israel and the Jewish people. And it's a demographic that's fallen through the cracks. They don't have, unfortunately, our political system here in Israel doesn't have, it's not a representative democracy. So whereas in the past, there was a political party that was made up of, it was called the Pensioners Party, the retirees, they might have been advocating for the well-being of Holocaust survivors. We don't even have that. The state of Israel does provide some financial disbursements to elderly people, Holocaust survivors, and of course to the nonprofits that help them as well. But again, the issue is the longer they live, the more needs they have, and the increase. And I'll just add one other point. Working in the nonprofit field as I do for the last almost 40 years, but specifically here in Israel, as we speak today, we're ironically, in the last 30 years, we're seeing the US dollar at its weakest compared to the Israeli shekel, which means that from all nonprofits that are receiving donations from overseas, it's not buying the same amount of service here in Israel as well. That's an additional conflict. That's an additional reality that we have to deal with here in Israel today.
How many Holocaust survivors live in Israel today?
The estimate is about 116,000, and and every year on Holocaust Memorial Day, the number is presented. The jarring number is that was 12,000 fewer than the year before. So that demonstrates, and certainly the rate of death among elderly people will increase the older they get. So, but even if it stays the same, that's the trajectory, that in 10 years, there will be none or virtually no more Holocaust survivors.
Now, the Holocaust was quite a long time ago. Do Holocaust survivors still suffer trauma today from what happened all those many years ago?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. But of course, the early trauma and experiences, the fear, the hiding, it's not a stretch by any imagination for somebody who, like my father's cousin, who's no longer alive, but who lived in a barn of a Christian home, a Christian family in Poland, and he and his father were saved as a result of that. It's not very different from having to hide in your bomb shelter as missiles are coming in. The same with food scarcity. If you don't have the money to buy food and you're living on one pita a day because that's what you can afford, and I'm not saying that that's the broad case, but all of these, we talk about PTSD, all of these little things, rockets overhead, the sounds of war, the hunger and physical needs that are associated with war, being cold in the winter for survivors who lived somehow for the freezing cold European winters with maybe, a single layer of clothes. All of this creates trauma. And the problem is, Paul, I think for many of them, they've been so traumatized in their life that they don't know anything different. So they don't know that that's not the norm. That's one of the reasons we want to do this, to give them, even if they're not recognizing that they are facing similar traumas here in the end of their lives as they faced in the beginning of their lives, we want to help alleviate that so it's one less thing that they need to worry about.
A lot of these Holocaust survivors must be really shocked today to see how things from the 1930s are actually coming back today. Just the rise in anti-Semitism, particularly in the UK. They must be really fearful to see that we haven't learned anything.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I never thought about it. But my immediate response on that is I wonder if because of all that they've seen and suffered, they're perhaps less shocked because they've seen the worst. And if they've seen the worst, perhaps they think that, of course, it could happen again. I think for those of us, our generation, who didn't see it in our lifetimes, but understand how horrific it was, and we have this, I think it's a kind of a useless slogan, never again. It just means, that was so horrible. It can never happen again. It should never happen again. But in fact, we're seeing the beginning of it happening again. And I think for us, living in the wake of the Holocaust, as horrible as it was to see it, I think that's even more jarring for Jews like myself, Christians like yourself, and people who are just of good conscience to see that the world hasn't learned and we're going down the same terrible dark rabbit hole.
Mm. Is this something that's personal to you? Did you have family members that went through the Holocaust?
Sure. I'm alive because my grandparents were able to get out of Poland in the 1930s, and my father was born here in Israel. Had my great grandparents not chosen and made it a priority to get their children out of Europe, then I wouldn't be here. But for all of the remaining family members in Europe who were unable to get out, I don't really have a full count, but in my respective grandparents' families, and that's only on my father's side, there were many dozens of people who were murdered. If I only go to siblings and their spouses and nieces and nephews and parents, I know there's a story of my great-grandmother as she was being deported to her death, told a young man who I had the privilege of meeting many years later when he was already very old, telling me that my great-grandmother ultimately saved his life and he was able to get away because of that. My daughter is named for her. My youngest son who was born here, who's now doing military service, is named for my great-grandfather and my father's first cousin, one who was a respected rabbi, the great-grandfather, and the other who was a 5-year-old boy who were murdered. So yeah, it's very personal. And the fact that we're here in Israel, the fact that I can do what I do, that I'm raising my children and now my grandchildren here in the Jewish state, it doesn't mitigate the threats that we have, but it does make it very personal. And it's hard not to pass a Holocaust Memorial Day thinking both on a national as well as a personal perspective.
I imagine as well that many family members are missing because they were murdered during the Holocaust. So Holocaust survivors are growing up with many family members missing, and they could have helped them in some of these financial situations, but they can't because they've been killed during the Holocaust.
Indeed, right. It's a domino effect. The fact that they suffered what they did and that there's no one left, that they were survived. I remember my great aunt telling me that while they could, they were sending care packages to the family still in Poland, but at some point the packages never arrived and presumably were confiscated by other Poles when our relatives were all killed. And I'll just say that when it comes personal, I know the Poles don't like taking responsibility for the Holocaust, and they've made it illegal to reference a Polish Holocaust or Polish actions. But the point in fact is that my great-grandparents and their siblings and their children and siblings and grandchildren who didn't make it out of Poland were all rounded up and shot in mass graves with the assistance of local Polish neighbors. And then when the survivors came back after, that was in 1942, when the survivors came back in spring of 1945, on the first day of Passover, 7 Jews, this is after the war, the 7 Jews were killed by their Polish neighbors for having the audacity to come back to try to rebuild their lives and reclaim their properties. So all of it's very personal, and I wish more people, it's not a matter of taking responsibility and blame, it's a matter of taking responsibility and making corrective decisions in the present so that such things will never happen again. Poland hasn't been so great about it. Germany has been much better about it. But on the other hand, there's a paradox. Germany has gone over the top by importing anti-Semitism with the opening of their immigration from Arab and Islamic countries. And when I was in Germany, I felt shockingly uncomfortable, not from the native Germans, but from the migrants who have come from all the Arab and Muslim countries.
Holocaust survivors today excited to hear that Christians and Jews are wanting to help them in this last hour and this last need?
That's such an important question because I've seen videos of Holocaust survivors going back to the communities where they came from and saying that literally walking onto the other side of the street from where the churches were and reflecting how, as young people, they were told to always stay away from the Christians and from the churches because those were dangerous. And that's another very, very, very important thing. And as you know, because what I do is build bridges between Jews and Christians, it needs to be reciprocal. If a Holocaust survivor in his or her final years can maybe not understand the depth of it, but understand that the church, I say in quotes, that threatened them 85 years ago is now represented by people who love them unconditionally and are sending funds and a warm hug so they can live the end of their lives in dignity and respect and without fear and trauma. That is a redemptive process that's so important, redemptive, corrective, and they may never understand why good Christians like yourself would care about Israel and the Jewish people, much less pray for and celebrate and advocate for, but at least there is that corrective process. So it's a little bit glaring, and it's hard for many Holocaust survivors to completely digest, but it's very, very important.
What is your prayer today for Holocaust survivors?
My prayer today is that we are able to succeed even in this very modest way and let them know, exactly as you just said, that there are Christians all over the world who are loving them, supporting them, and who may never meet them, but want to see that their last years are lived in comfort with no fear and without want of very basic things. And I think that ultimately serves the God that we both worship.
So anyone who feels that they want to help Holocaust survivors at this time, what is your website address for people who can actually donate to you and the work that you're doing there with the Holocaust survivors?
Right. So we have a specific landing page, and I would love it for people to come to the Genesis123.co website and just send me an email so I can make sure that any donations that go through are earmarked for this project. Again, it's Genesis123.co, and we'll set that up. We want individuals to donate $1, $10, $100 a month, and we want churches to donate $1,000 a year for 10 years and just to be part of that broader big mission that I feel so relieved at being able to do this, and I'm excited to be able to carry it out for the next decade.
Well, Jonathan, thank you very much for sharing today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Paul. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today. Pray that God will move by his mighty power in the Holy Land and bring his peace.